Hello lovely fairy tale friends and welcome to my new video. Today I'm going to read for you Rapunzel by the Grimms. I hope you enjoy it and subscribe my channel. All around the enchantress house there were high, forbidding walls, but beyond them lay a beautiful garden. The miller and his wife could see into it from their bedroom window, although they had never dared to set foot inside. Then, when the miller's wife found she was having a baby, she began to crave all kinds of unusual foods. One morning, she looked out of her window and spotted a leafy green plant growing in the enchantress' garden. "Look at that lovely Rapunzel," she said to her husband. "I must have some to make into a salad." I'm not sure that's such a good idea," said her husband nervously. "How about some nice cheese instead?" His wife shook her head. No other food could tempt her. As the days went by, she grew pale and miserable. The miller loved his wife dearly and hated to see her so unhappy. Even though he was afraid, he decided to try to get some Rapunzel for her. He waited until it was dark and then clambered over into the enchantress' garden. Luckily, she was nowhere to be seen. Tiptoeing over to where the Rapunzel grew, the miller picked the juiciest leaves and put them in his pouch. Then he climbed back over the wall. His wife was absolutely delighted when he brought her the Rapunzel. She chopped up the leaves with some tomatoes and lettuce and ate it all for her supper. But the salad was so tasty that it only made her long for more. The next evening, the miller climbed into the garden once again. Hurriedly, he picked the Rapunzel and turned to go, but to his horror, the enchantress was blocking his way. Her stony eyes seemed to stare right into his soul. "How dare you steal my Rapunzel?" she stormed. "You pay for this with your life." "I'm terrible sorry," stammered the miller. "It's for my wife. She's going to have a baby." The enchantress' face softened. "Well, why didn't you say so?" she said. "In that case, you may help yourself to as much Rapunzel as you like. There's just one condition." "What is it?" asked the miller fearfully. "When the baby is born, you must give it to me," replied the enchantress. The miller was so terrified that he didn't dare to refuse. He was just happy to escape alive. Scrambling back over the wall, he hurried to his wife and gave her the Rapunzel. But he didn't tell her what had happened. The months went by, and the miller and his wife looked forward to the birth of their baby. He tried to forget about the promise he had made, but his happiness was overshadowed by his dark secret. The very day the miller's wife gave birth, the enchantress appeared in the nursery. "Hand over the child," she demanded. The baby started to cry. "Leave us alone," shouted the miller. "You've no business here." "A deal is a deal," snarled the enchantress, "and I've come to collect my payment." Pushing him aside, she snatched the baby out of the crib and vanished into thin air. She named the baby Rapunzel after the plant the miller had stolen from her. As the child grew up, the enchantress treated her like a slave and never let her out of her sight. The years went by and Rapunzel became more and more beautiful. Her golden hair shone like the sun itself. It grew thick and fast, tumbling over her shoulders, past her waist and right down to her feet. Yet still Rapunzel's hair kept on growing. Eventually, she had to tie it up just to stop it from getting tangled. That girl's getting far too pretty, thought the enchantress one morning as she watched her scrubbing the floor. If I'm not careful, some handsome young man will come along and fall in love with her. So she imprisoned Rapunzel in a tower in the middle of the forest. Escape was out of the question. The tower had no door or staircase, and the only window was high up in the walls. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she stood at the bottom and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." At this, Rapunzel unfastened her hair and let it fall down to the ground. The enchantress grabbed hold of it and hauled herself up. A whole year went by and not a soul came near apart from the enchantress. There was nothing to do up in the tower, so Rapunzel would often sing to amuse herself. One day, quite by chance, a young prince was riding by when he heard her sweet voice drift down on the breeze. The prince stopped to listen. Rapunzel's song was so beautiful and sad that it touched his heart. He circled the tower looking for a door, but there wasn't one. He was about to call up to the window when he heard someone coming. Quickly, he hid behind a tree. The enchantress marched to the tower. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she commanded. To the prince's surprise, a golden braid tumbled down from the window, and the enchantress used it to haul herself up. The prince waited for her to leave. Then he decided to try the trick for himself. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," he called up to the window. Down tumbled Rapunzel's golden braid once again. The prince took hold of it and began to climb up. When Rapunzel realized that it wasn't the enchantress, she let out a cry of fear. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to frighten you," said the prince as he reached the top. "I heard you singing and had to see you." He climbed in through the window, and soon the two of them were chatting away like old friends. "It's nice to have someone to talk to," said Rapunzel mournfully. "I get so lonely up here. How I wish I could escape." "Perhaps I can help you," said the prince. So the two of them put their heads together. And between them they came up with a plan. Each evening the prince came to the tower and brought with him a ball of silk. Secretly, Rapunzel began to weave a ladder from it. The weeks went by and the ladder grew longer and longer. It was almost time for Rapunzel to make her escape. Then one day the enchantress arrived at her usual time. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she called. So Rapunzel did. As the enchantress climbed up, she tugged so hard that she almost pulled Rapunzel's hair out by the roots. "Ouch! You're so much rougher than the prince," grumbled Rapunzel. "What was that?" shrieked the enchantress. "Wicked girl, so you've had a visitor, have you? Well, I'll make sure it never happens again." In an instant she whipped out a pair of scissors and cut off Rapunzel's hair. "Oh!" cried Rapunzel in horror. "My hair, it's all gone." "I haven't finished with you yet, young lady," the enchantress snapped. Waving her wand, she muttered some mysterious words under her breath. A moment later, Rapunzel found herself stranded in a hot, parched desert. There was endless nothingness as far as the eye could see. Meanwhile, the enchantress took Rapunzel's hair and tied it to the leg of the bed. Then she settled down to wait for the prince. It wasn't long before she heard him cry. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Keeping herself hidden, the enchantress threw the hair out of the window. The prince took hold of it and began to climb up the tower. He reached the top and was halfway through the window before she saw the enchantress glowering at him. "What have you done with Rapunzel?" he demanded. "Have you come to rescue your pretty little sweetheart?" she mocked. "Well, you're too late. She's gone far away from here. You never see her again. Of course, if you're looking for a wife," she added, leering at him. This was too much for the prince. He tried to climb back down, but in his hurry he lost his grip. Down he fell, tumbling head over heels. He would certainly have been killed if a thorn bush had not broken his fall. But although it saved his life, the thorns scratched his eyes and blinded him. The prince struggled to his feet. "I'll find Rapunzel somehow," he cried defiantly. For months the prince tried to find Rapunzel. He asked everyone he met whether they had seen her, but no one had. Then, one day, he stopped at a market town on the edge of the desert. Through all the bustle and hubbub she heard a voice so familiar that it made his heart leap with joy. "Rapunzel?" he called. At the sound of her name, a golden-haired girl turned around. It was Rapunzel. She ran to the prince and threw her arms around him. "Your poor eyes," she whispered. Gently she kissed each one. As she did, tears rolled down her cheeks and fell into them. The prince blinked, and in a blur of tears her beautiful face appeared before him. "I can see you," he exclaimed. Kneeling down in the sand, he kissed her hand. "Now that I've found you, will you marry me?" he asked. "Of course," answered Rapunzel without a moment's hesitation. Everyone in the whole kingdom was invited to their wedding, including the miller and his wife. They were delighted to be reunited with their daughter at last, and she with them. It was the happiest of days. The bells rang, the birds sang, and the sun shone brightly. Luckily, the enchantress stayed away, and although she sulked for a very long time, she never bothered Rapunzel and the prince again. I hope you liked the video and subscribe my channel. See you next time.